Welcome to the Microburbs podcast, where we bring suburb data to life. Learn from top industry experts, the best places to live, invest and grow. And now on with the show. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Luke.
It is a real pleasure to talk to someone who has been in the industry for so long.
Thank you.
I won't give away your age, but it does really make a difference when someone has seen markets both up and down. Now, you focus today on the Mornington Peninsula, but you've actually got a background looking at the whole country, right?
That's correct. Yeah, I live on the peninsula, and I work exclusively now on the peninsula as a buyer's advocate. But prior to moving down here, I lived in Melbourne and ran a business where we bought property around Australia. So I have some experience in investment and property management and multiple markets. So I have that as a bit of a background, but now very specialised in a lifestyle market on the peninsula.
So there's an old saying, I'll probably misquote it slightly, but he who only knows England doesn't really know England. Yeah. So you bring to your work a perspective. You've seen a whole lot of different parts of the country, and that helps. I would imagine that would help provide context for you in your role here at BuyerX.
It does provide context in that no two markets are the same, even though the basic fundamentals are always underlying. There are niches in each market, whether that's a mining town or a coastal town or a capital city. They'll have different drivers. So it's important to know what you're getting into in that particular market. So understanding that market and the forces applied to that market is critical to getting the outcome that you're looking for.
Yes. And yes, so I understand Mornington Peninsula is quite a diverse market. So you've got like Portsea, I guess that's a little bit like Palm Beach in Sydney, would you say?
It's the millionaires playground, or the billionaires playground now. There are some pretty exclusive clifftop properties in the $20 to $40 million space, which, that borders Sorrento and the bay and the ocean. So that's really the last tip of the peninsula. Very few properties come up for sale. They're held for generations. It's not a high transactional market. You do get a lot of properties coming up in summer on the peninsula, so that tends to be when you see some in Portsea show up. But Portsea is the really top echelon, and then also on the peninsula you have the very entry level, the sort of Rosebud and Tookarook suburbs, which are almost not quite at $1 million median price. So quite a difference between the 4 entry point of Portsea and probably the 500,000 or 600,000 entry point of Rosebud.
That's more like Frankston, just to the north, yeah?
Similar demographic. Frankston's more of a commercial hub because there's a train station and jobs and shopping centres. Rosebud is a small version of that on the peninsula. It was traditionally a holiday town. A lot of people had holiday houses and there's foreshore camping, so it was a destination to come to for summer. It tends to also be a place where retirees ended up spending the rest of their life after they left Melbourne and enjoyed their holidays and decided to live down in Rosebud and surrounds. But it's now becoming, there's high schools and jobs and infrastructure, there's a hospital. So it's now becoming more of a stable suburb that's less reliant on tourism.
Yeah, right. So you mentioned before Portsea, tightly held market, which is not unusual for waterside markets I found here in Sydney. When people do move in, what kind of person is coming in? What stage of their life are they at? A good stage?
Well, they need to have money, so they're not. Yeah. They're not. What do we call them? Millennials. They're more the Gen X to Boomer type demographic, either teenage kids or adult children. I think there are the odd exception to the rule. I've represented clients with young children who have just been really successful in their careers and have wanted Portsea because it does offer a quieter escape with usually larger blocks and privacy, beautiful beaches, and really not a lot of holiday makers other than the locals. There is the Portsea pub and the beach where you do get day trippers, but it's quite expensive to stay in Portsea, so it tends to be residents and family that come and visit.
Mm. So it's quite away from Melbourne. What's the commute time to
Mm.
the CBD?
You got to pick your times. You definitely don't want to do it on a Friday night after work. It's probably an hour and a half. Depending on which way you take. If you take the scenic route along the bay, or you take the Mornington Peninsula Freeway, but yeah, anywhere from sort of an hour and 20 to an hour and 40 will get you there.
Yeah, so it's people who have made a good amount of money, but maybe they don't need to be in town every day.
Some of my clients that I've bought there have wanted the home office. The properties are quite large, so there's usually 4 or 5 bedrooms, multiple living areas. So there is room for home offices, and I guess those executives, particularly in a post-COVID world, are able to work from home and take the family down and multitask. So it gives, you are only an hour and a half from Melbourne if you do need to shoot up. So you're not too far away from the action, but you also get the ability to telecommute. They've got the NBN and phone service. It's not too far. It's not too remote. You can still work and then spend the rest of your time on the beach.
Mm. Sounds lovely.
Hmm.
Yeah, so prices obviously went up with COVID. People looking for that getaway place, and how's the market looking now?
Yeah, prices rose in some suburbs 50% over that, say, 18-month period. Blairgowrie was probably the largest riser in that short period of time. Sorrento, Portsea followed suit. Flinders was also very strong. And then at the top of the peninsula, the northern suburbs of sort of Mount Eliza, Mornington and Mount Martha, they all had similar in the 40% growth over that period. Some of that has come back with the interest rate rises and the fact that people who were in the market to buy probably now, if they haven't bought, won't be able to afford the prices because of the rapid increase. We are lucky that we are a low stock market anyway. There's no land that can be further developed. The planning regulations are very tight, so we are landlocked around water on both sides, the bay and the ocean. So there's never really an oversupply unless things get pretty dire, but that's going to be dire everywhere. So while we're in a low stock environment, the prices have held up okay. I'd say possibly 10 to 15% worst case from the peak that we've come back. But the good quality properties are still selling quickly. And when I say good quality, it's properties that have a scarcity value to them, whether it's the location close to the beach and the shops in that particular suburb, or whether it's a view or a good size block of land that it sits on, or an architectural designed home that's styled really well. So anything that has a little bit of wow factor is still performing quite strongly. The properties that are struggling at the moment are the ones where you might have to do some work, or they're complete knockdowns because the cost of building and the holding costs are now starting to eat into the budgets of the potential buyers. So they're just sort of avoiding or being very careful with not overspending on those types of properties.
Yeah. So you would imagine that the relative price to Melbourne in the post-COVID world would be higher, given all the, particularly Melburnians, you guys are massively into work from home. When I come to Melbourne, I'm like, hey, I'm in Melbourne again. Come to the CBD. And they're like, let's just do a video call. Unless they're going to do like 2 hours of drinking or a long heart to heart, more like a movie, less like a quick police procedural, just go through the motions for a meeting. So you guys
Yeah,
are very well adapted to this post-COVID work from home world?
Yeah, I don't know how that was pre-COVID. It feels like so long ago, um, to try and think about what the expectation was. But as our business, we've always been quite flexible with our staff, particularly the advocates. We're quite a mobile role anyway. Um, but since COVID, I guess even just thinking about my friends and family members, particularly those that work in government, are very slow to return to full time work in the office rather. So
That's not a
um,
Freudian slip there.
I'm sure they're still working full time hours, um,
Sure.
but maybe some flexibility over the 9 to 5. Yeah, look, Melbourne's a fairly spread out geography, and I guess during COVID, a lot of clients that I represented were leaving Melbourne and relocating to the peninsula. So everyone there was saying to me, "Look, we can work from home now, and there's the flexibility. And if we do need to go in, it's only going to be for a couple of days a week." So we can manage that commute. It's an hour at the top end of the peninsula to get to Melbourne, which is manageable. It can take an hour to get into the city, even if you only live 15 k's away in some bottlenecks. So, that's not a daunting task. And still, yes, prices have risen. I mean, Melbourne's probably still more expensive, but you do get a different lifestyle and a different type of property on the peninsula. You tend to have larger blocks, more boundary width to your neighbours. And it just feels a bit more relaxed. You don't have traffic that you sit in to get to the supermarket and you can't find a park. So there's just a different lifestyle which attracts people. So working from home, maybe getting slightly better value for your money, and not being in the rat race, certainly still
Mm.
appealing, even if prices have risen sharply.
I was in Palm Beach a couple of weeks ago with my daughter, and it felt like Australia 20, 30 years ago, maybe 40 years ago. So it was slower, more spacious. Even along the, I don't know if this is true for uh, Mornington Peninsula, but even along the main strip, along this absolutely beautiful beach, there was a lot of it was just houses. It wasn't developed,
Yeah,
and very the ethnic mix of pre post war immigration,
yeah,
if you know what I'm saying.
yes, that's
So
similar
yeah,
to this, yeah.
that's true for Mornington Peninsula as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. We actually have a large sort of UK expat community. I don't know whether they're drawn to maybe the coastal lifestyle, or whether there's enough of a community that brings them out because they've got people they know, but there tends to be a lot of English, um, yeah, Scottish, Irish sort of migrants that are on the peninsula. Um, but yeah, it is quite an Anglo-Saxon type community, and I think although it's changing, it's definitely not as multicultural as inner city Melbourne.
Mm. I wonder, from the point of view of the English, you've got a bit of money, perhaps. If you're going to move you've already got a modern Western English speaking country. If you're going to move to Australia, you probably want something iconically Australian. Yeah, you want
Yeah,
that spacious life with the beach lifestyle, and you're not going to get that in a city, Melbourne. It'll feel more like London.
yeah, I think that's probably fair to say. Melbourne, even though there is St Kilda through to down to Mentone and beyond, where you can live by the beach, it's not a particularly coastal lifestyle like it is on the peninsula. So you can see that draw card of let's move to Australia and live by the beach. Well, it's probably one of the more affordable places to live if that's the goal.
Mm. Yeah, it's sounds lovely. So we've got it's quite a microcosm, from what I can see in terms of Australia. So you understand you have some industrial on the east side of the region. Do you cover that as well?
We have. Well, Mornington is a commercial slash industrial centre for the peninsula. So there is an industrial estate. My office is actually in that industrial estate. They have a lot of conversions, so there are warehouses that are fitted out as offices, but generally it's some factories and mechanics, any sort of trades that need to store their goods or products. Dramana also has an industrial centre. So does Rosebud. What tends to be happening in some of these industrial areas is it's becoming um, a little bit hip. So you're getting some of these conversions with microbreweries and distilleries and some coffee roasteries, butchers, premium butchers and produce. So it's it's sort of becoming something that you would probably see in, say, Fitzroy or Collingwood in Melbourne, which is urban sort of industrial. What at one time was an industrial area, which then became suburban to a degree. So that's starting to happen also on the peninsula, which is it's a different sort of feel to the normal coastal aesthetic.
Yeah, that's very good. And yeah, so and then more to the north. So the price gradation that does it where how does it? Obviously, you've got Portsea in the south west, and describe how it gets cheaper, like along the coast versus moving
Yeah.
inland. I think before when we were talking, you mentioned about there are certain dividing lines, certain roads that divide the housing stock up.
Yeah, look, there's a beach side or a highway side of the Nepean Highway in the top end of the peninsula, so the Melbourne northern end. Prices on the beach side, as you would expect for land, are more expensive because there's only a finite amount. Um, the suburbs that have a little bit of elevation, so cliff tops or a hill where you get a view, tend to be more expensive. So if you think about Mornington, there's Kalimna Drive, which is all cliff top properties. There's properties in there that are 15 to 20 plus million, but then the median price in Mornington is actually only about 1.2 million. So there's quite a differential between the median and the very top end in some of these suburbs. You don't get that same disparity in, say, Dramana, for example, which is further along the bay. You still have properties there with views, but you don't have a cliff top. You don't get cliffs again until you get to Sorrento, and that's when the properties then you've got the sort of Point King Millionaire's Walk, where those properties in there are $20 million plus. So I think when you are absolute waterfront, you can command a big price. When you have to look over rooftops, it starts to become a compromise for people that want to have that absolute waterfront. So the prices just aren't there. So that's the beach side of the highway that runs down. Then you've got in the middle of the peninsula an acreage market, which everyone probably has heard of Red Hill because of the winery district. But Red Hill through to Flinders is quite an expensive belt. There's a lot of people that look for hobby farms from that sort of 5 to sort of 10-acre size, and those properties have probably doubled in the last 3 or 4 years.
Wow.
Used to be able to get one for 2 million, and now it's pretty much 4 million for a small hobby farm. There's some really lavish properties in Flinders. There was one recently that sold for 23 million, with water views over to Phillip Island. So there are the absolute top end of the market also in Flinders. There's a definite scarcity factor in some of the best streets there. And then as you come down off the hill into Flinders Township, where you meet the Western Port Bay and Bass Strait, again, Shoreham to Flinders is probably the strongest market on that side of the peninsula in terms of um, not only value but also buyer demand.
Mm. You mentioned before about hobby farms. Is there any scope for them to be increased in density rezoning?
No, unlikely. They're very strict with what you can do. You can't subdivide because of the farm zones, but you can realign your boundaries. So some people buy land off their neighbours and increase their size of their blocks. You know, there's farms from 100 acres down to sort of 3 acres. So you do. There is a very scarce amount of properties in that 3 to 5 acre amount. So you've got to be pretty lucky to find them, and that's why I think the values jumped so large or so great for that particular type of product, because when one comes up, you may not see another one for a while, and so
Mm.
people will do whatever they can to buy it.
Yeah, that's interesting. A consolidating market. Not usually in Australia, things just get divided up into bits and bits, but
Yeah.
you're describing this process of farms getting bigger, which of course is what happens out in agricultural Australia with economies of scale. But this is
Mm.
more hobby farms. This is more just, you just want to have a bigger block because it's more fun to have a bigger block. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there is some tax advantages by having a crop or having some cattle on your hobby farm. So,
Ostriches,
sorry,
ostriches.
ostrich. I'm not sure about that, but
It used to be a ostrich farm tax. It was a classic thing from back in the day. I'm showing my age here, but yeah, there was this combination of instruments, financial instruments that you could apply, whereby it was cost plus. So, like, if you spend,
right.
I don't know what it was, $1,000 for an ostrich, then you make $3,000. That sort of stuff.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's the right climate for ostriches on the peninsula, but
No.
there's certainly cattle, sheep. You get some alpacas. Most people put in grapes or something like that and get a winemaker to maintain them, and they just rent the space to someone to maintain, but they get to look over the vineyard. Sort of adds a little
Yeah,
bit of.
right. Are there wine tours?
There are, yeah. There's the region has I'd say 50 to 100 wineries, and not all of them have cellar doors. There are some larger wineries that have restaurants, and some have accommodation as well. But there's events throughout the year that you can sample some wines from different wineries in the region. But yeah, there's also private tours that you can take to go and do some wine hopping. And it's sort of 15 to 20 minutes in the car from the beach. So you can be having a holiday from Melbourne by the sea, and then a day might be a bit overcast and you think, well, it's not a beach day, let's go and do some wineries. So there's multiple things that people come to the peninsula
Yeah,
for.
or given Melbourne weather, do one
That's
for a
right.
couple of hours and then off to the other one. Oh, the sun's come out.
Back
Drive
to the
down to
beach.
the beach.
Yeah,
Be opportunistic.
that's right.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I'm detecting an overall theme of scarcity.
Yeah.
There's not that much volume on the market. I'm interested as a buyer's advocate. How do you navigate that? Tell us about the benefits of using a buyer's advocate in a low volume market.
Yeah, look, I think one of the main benefits is access to stock that you wouldn't see as a regular buyer. Um, I'm speaking to real estate agents daily, and they tell me about properties that they've got coming up, and I get access to look at these before they hit the market. Um, I guess as a buyer, when there's not much stock to look at, you can, especially if you're traveling down from Melbourne to look at stock, you can become a little bit um, sort of compromise with your decision making, because it becomes an effort. You end up settling for something that is good enough, but you're not quite happy with, and then you don't use it as much because there's things about the property that you don't like. So, I guess having a buyer's advocate helps you make the right decisions and not compromise on something because it's becoming too hard.
Yeah, so you might have
Yeah,
specific criteria, and so there's only really one house worth looking at. But is it really worth the drive? I would imagine you'd be targeting your time poor professionals. Is it
yeah,
really worth the drive? Spend an entire morning just to see one place, whereas you know the market. You might have already seen the house before it's been open for inspection, or at least you know about that
Mm.
street, so you
Yeah.
can direct attention.
Yeah, and I do that. For my clients, I go out and inspect properties and send them back photos and videos, so they don't actually have to come down until I tell them to, because we need to buy it. So I give them that sort of strong advice about whether it's a yes or a no. At the end of the day, it's their decision, but they've come to me because either they don't know the area, or they don't have the time, and so I facilitate that for them. Understanding what the values are also fairly difficult if you don't know the market or the precincts within a suburb. So not only having the relationship with the agent to find the property, but also knowing what to pay and whether or not it's worth buying are all really critical decisions that I give that guidance on.
Hmm. You mentioned before, one thing that's been sticking in my head is that there's more available. Was this in Portsea in summer? Is that because they sell better in summer? Is it because you can people are thinking about the beach?
Yeah, there's more people around. I don't think at that level we'll get lucky and someone walking past will put their hand up. That might happen at the $1 to $2 million range properties, but certainly not at the cliff tops. I think it's also a time when there's more auctions because the weather permits. You get bigger crowds, even if they're not participating. It's still the theatrical side of it's there. It's good for the agents to showcase their wares in front of a crowd as well. So I'd say it's a stronger time to list your property on the market. There's more properties for sale, but there's more buyers that are around. Yes, they present better. It showcases the lifestyle better when it's warm and sunny. But all of the suburbs on the peninsula have different, buyer profiles, and yes, Portsea and some of Sorrento tend to be holiday homes. But if you go closer to Melbourne, Mount Martha, Mornington, Mount Eliza, there's now mainly residential homes, with a spattering of holiday homes through there. So that follows more of a normal market cycle at the top, whereas more of the beachside southern end properties
Mm.
be more summer based.
Yeah, right. So you've got a holiday home or rich person's getaway in the southwest, and then more in the north. Is it more? Would you say it's more part of metropolitan Melbourne? Are people commuting to the city
Mm.
even now?
Yeah, we were classified as metropolitan Melbourne during our COVID lockdowns, which most of the community
Did not
felt
like, I'll bet.
we should have been regional, but for whatever reason, even though it says you're entering regional Victoria, when you get to the peninsula, we weren't counted as regional. Yes, the answer is a lot of people do commute to town still from the top end of the peninsula. Particularly people have moved in the last few years. They haven't left their job; they've just moved. There are jobs down on the peninsula, not so many corporate jobs though. So
Mm.
if you are in finance or banking or anything where you need to be in the CBD, um, you know, there's
Yeah.
really no
Similarly,
replacement for the jobs on the peninsula.
yeah, in the Blue Mountains here in Sydney, the lower towns tend to be extensions of the western suburbs, and the people will be more similar to Sydney western suburbs. But once you get up to Katoomba, and it's got its own culture, it's got its own vibe, it's a destination of its own. So
Mm.
I imagine that's kind of what's happening here. So I made an assumption about your customer base. I just applied the generic template of what buyers advocates customers are, but perhaps you could describe and segment your customers.
Mm.
What kind of people go for you?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that time poor professionals are probably my most common client, but that's not always the case. I have, I'm representing a client at the moment who um, just really doesn't really know what she wants, or is a little bit scared of the process, feels intimidated talking to agents, is unsure if she'll make the right decision on a property. So she really needs advice a lot during this process, which I'm happy to give her. And she's not a high budget buyer. So, it's not just the time poor professionals that want to spend $5 million that come and see me. It's really anybody. I tend not to work with first home buyers because they can't afford to pay for my service. So there is probably a small gap in the market in that price point, which I can't help. But yeah, look, whether it's a family that's relocating from Melbourne or even a family that wants a holiday house, it does vary. My most common client would be a downsizer age client from Melbourne who has downsized their family home to a townhouse or an apartment in Melbourne and wants to spend 50% of their week on the peninsula in something new that they don't have to spend any money renovating or maintaining. So that's either a sort of a luxury beach house or a townhouse. They tend to be the most typical client of mine because there's probably more of those buyers in the market at the moment, but I think that may change.
What about investors?
There has been a lot of investors that want to do the Airbnb investment and use the property themselves when it's not being rented out. During COVID, I had a lot of inquiries and represented quite a few clients that wanted that strategy. There comes a point when the market becomes saturated. I don't know if we're there yet, but when there's a lot of properties on the market for rent, for short-term rentals, the only thing you can do is drop your price, and so it becomes less of an attractive investment play when your yield's only as strong as the long-term rental yield. So I would say, as a pure investment, the price points are probably a little bit high on your yield return. So I think if you were using it as some personal enjoyment use and then supplementing some of your mortgage costs with some rental income and you're happy to manage it yourself, I still think it's a good option. But I think there's probably better markets here in Australia if you're building a portfolio. Yes, diversify, of course, but you probably would need to spend $1 million on your asset here, which, if you're looking at around the country in regional areas, still you can get two for that. So, maybe as part of your portfolio at some point it would be okay, but I think there's probably better options at the moment elsewhere.
Yeah, right. So Airbnb is mostly rented during summer, is it? And not much in the rest of the year?
It's definitely the premium time where you get more money, more of a nightly rate. There are there's winter events still, particularly in the winery areas of Red Hill, where people will still come down and have weekends away. You don't get the same premium on your rate, but you still get some bookings. So I think I always work on a 12-week per year tenanted ratio, so you sort of can forecast what your cash flow might be. That leaves a lot of vacancy to use yourself during the year, but it still gives you a better yield than a long-term rental.
So you provide this advice, so you're able to work out the yield for potential properties for your clients.
Yeah, I mean, I would show them some evidence behind other properties that are like in similar areas and what cash flow they're getting. Sometimes properties that come on the market already have a ledger from being a rental property in the past, so that's always something you can refer to. Some of the Airbnb operators that I talk to down here are saying that it's becoming harder and they don't expect to get the same returns this year as they got last year. But as part of my due diligence, I will look at a rental appraisal that I do myself, but I'll also reach out to either or both a short-term and a long-term property manager for their opinion as well.
And what do you expect to happen in terms of capital growth?
Yeah, good question. I think it's dependent on what happens with rate rises. Um, I think we'll probably grow at income growth, which isn't a lot. Um, I wish I had a crystal ball. I don't think we're going to have any further price corrections. I think that's probably already happened. Um, there may be one or two more rate rises from what I'm hearing. That would be great if
Yeah.
that's the case. We won't have any growth, I don't think, until maybe another 12 months time. So there's a good buying window where you can buy without paying a premium, maybe for up to a year.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm constantly asked where particular suburbs are going to be, and I'm like, I haven't finished the model yet. Then once that's done, I do have forecasts, but I don't have them off the top of my head. It's not like I'm
Yeah,
looking at spreadsheets all day, zooming into places. I don't have that local kind of knowledge. It's much more algorithmic. But
yeah,
yeah, there's that classic saying: analysts predict the future not because they know, but because they're asked.
yeah, that's right. And I don't think there's so many variables that I don't think we'll ever have AI be able to predict growth. But what we do as buyers advocates is not say we can get you X return. We say we will minimize or mitigate as many risks as we can for your investment or for your owner occupied purchase. Um, we will buy something that is has a scarcity value, that has a good component of value in the land because that's important for capital growth, and for being defensive, and also make sure we're buying a quality asset that isn't going to be difficult to sell, particularly if your circumstances change, and you're not selling in a market that's strong. So we we kind of try and stop all of the risk factors from being prohibitive for you, and then the growth that we get on top of that is a bonus.
Sure. So, is it safe, Mornington Peninsula? Where are there dodgy parts?
Well, I think you would have the better statistics on this than me with microburbs, but I think there are some safer areas than others. There's community housing in some suburbs, which sometimes can have some undesirable activity. Um, we don't have a train line, and um, I guess from my experience, crime tends to follow the train lines. We have the train line stops at Frankston, so we have a bus public transport system on the peninsula. It's a little bit harder for criminals to get around on a bus. So um, my experience is very low crime, comparative to inner city, but we're not immune to crime. There's still burglary that goes on. Um, it just tends to be not something that we really talk about because it doesn't happen. It just doesn't seem to happen much in our circles.
Sure. Is there scope for increased density? So, is there potential? Are there units going up? Are there more coming or medium density?
Um, Mornington's probably the suburb, Mandurmana are the suburbs where developers like to buy and put in townhouses. Um, Regulations have changed. It's not as easy to do that now. A lot of applications go to VCAT. I think um, there's just there's minimum lot sizes throughout the peninsula where you just can't subdivide. So I can't see density being a problem. Um, Certainly, beachside Mornington has a number of townhouses that have been developed through really on the western side of Main Street through to sort of Fisherman's Beach and along the Esplanade. There are quite a few double sort of side by side townhouses. Um, there's not a lot of properties left. There's still there's still the post war home brick homes there that could be knocked over and developed, but not sure there's a lot of profit left in those because values have risen so sharply that and building costs have grown so much that it's really testing the ceiling for those sorts of properties. So I don't think it's as an attractive proposition anymore for someone wanting to use that as a
Mm.
profit making exercise. Other suburbs in the peninsula, I think I touched on Dramana, a little bit happening in Rosebud West, and maybe parts of Macrae that border Rosebud. But yeah, the peninsula is pretty strict on its development regulations, so um, I can't see density being a problem.
So, from the point of view of an investor, yeah, obviously it's a small amount, but if an investor came to you and said they're really looking to find a place they could subdivide, would you be able to point them in the right direction to LEPs or such?
Yeah, there's certainly blocks that can be done based on precedent. I would put them in touch with a town planner on all the sites that we look at, just to make sure that they can do what they want to do. They'll get, I guess, I mean, they're not going to get an approval, but they'll get a pretty good indication of whether it's possible. It's getting harder and harder to find those sites. So,
Mm.
um, I guess you'd want to be an owner builder, or you'd want to have sort of close connection with a builder who can do that with a sort of a tight budget for you to have a profit margin in there.
Or perhaps just buy and keep it as it is, keep the tenant in there, and sell to someone who will do that work for you, someone who has the relationship to the builder, land
Yeah,
bank.
you can certainly land bank. There's some land banking going on at the moment in Mornington as you head towards the Murdoch Highway from the Nepean. There's sort of land releases that are happening along that sort of green wedge strip. I think that's where you'll see some of that sprawl happen. So I think if you owned property, there's a big block. Might be about 50 acres, I think, that's on the market at the moment along the Murdoch Highway. It's green wedge, but eventually that'll be rezoned. I think that's where you'll get some of that. If you're wanting to land bank and you've got some money behind you, that's probably where I'd be putting it, along that Murdoch Highway.
Yeah, right. And tell me about the housing stock. When were the houses built?
Yeah, a lot of the original homes were just small beach shacks. Uh,
Whereabouts is that?
well, all the suburbs had different sort of establishment dates, but the I guess the suburbs where you were on the foreshore, so Blackgowrie, Rye, Tookarook to a degree. These suburbs had sort of fibro shacks, two bedders. Sometimes they had the bathroom separately to the house. All within a couple of blocks walk to the beach. So that was the typical type of housing. A lot of those were bowled over and rebuilt, but some people renovated and kept and extended. There's a mix. There's a mixture of your sort of classic weatherboard homes, and the new homes that you see built are, there's a trend towards the vertical shiplap clad sort of coastal sympathetic style. Right through to some of the older homes in Sorrento and Portsea that even have a bit of an Art Deco feel to them. So there's a real eclectic mix. The homes that you see along the cliffs tend to be a lot of steel and sort of linear shaped, where you have large windows that take in the views. It's a real mix of styles and architecture.
Mm. Tell me, what do you like most about your job? What gets you excited?
I love helping people. That's the primary thing that gets me most excited, is when I see that joy and excitement in someone's eyes when they've found a property and they've been the successful purchaser. I love looking at properties. I love talking to agents and negotiating. It's it's really rewarding being on the receiving or winning side. Um, I think that it's the personal connections that I and the friendships and relationships that I build with my clients that is quite important to me, because I really like to get to know people and understand them so that I can help them buy something that's going to be right for them for the long term. And unless I really truly understand them as a family, um, I just can't give them that advice properly.
Mm.
So yeah, it's the personal relationships, I guess, and a lot of the past clients that I've had, I've kept in touch with, and even still socialise with, because it is a process where we get to know each other quite well, and um, it feels a bit strange once you bought the property for that to just stop. It's almost like you get to the end and it's like, okay, shake your hand, won't see you again, when you've been talking to each other daily for 6 months. So um, the personal connection, I think, is something that I really enjoy.
Mm. Yeah. What are the hard parts of the job? Every job has them, right?
Yeah, sometimes not having enough money when I know that the property is right, and there may not be another one like it. I think sometimes delivering that bad news that when we've been unsuccessful, when someone's emotionally attached, can be difficult. Um, there's look. I think you can learn from every experience that you have, um, whether it's an incorrect strategy or you didn't have the right mindset, or you weren't organised. There's always things that you can do better for the next one, and sometimes um, it's a learning process for the client, even though they might be upset about the outcome. The next time we come up on a property that ticks all the boxes, they just have a different understanding of what it takes. And so, there are some difficult times, and it can be a bit of a roller coaster, but we always get a good result in the end. And I guess turning some of those negative experiences into a more rewarding experience at the end can make it worth it.
Mm. We've talked obviously a hell of a lot about buying. Maybe we talk a little bit about selling. Why do people sell homes in Mornington Peninsula?
Um, some people just have inherited holiday houses over the years and don't use them, or they've had the owner of the house has passed away, and the adult children don't want to keep the house. So there's those that happen. Upgrading. So it's just like any other market where you have people wanting to improve their homes, or downsize. There is a percentage of stock that turns over, which you see sell every few years, and they tend to be ones where people buy, particularly lately on cheaper interest, made some money, and then look to capitalise before they think the market might come back. So they're really just a short term flip to make some money. That I've seen some of those come up lately, but it's not like I said before. We're a very low stock market, so it's not a common thing. But I think probably you see a lot of the auctions that come up. They tend to be deceased estates, so there's I guess a changing of the guard on some of those properties.
People are dying to get out of there. So what's the vision for Mornington Peninsula? So where do various governments, LGA and the state government, where do they see it going over the next 10, 20, 50 years?
Uh, I think they want to keep it as is. I don't think they want to have the peninsula grow in any meaningful population. They certainly don't want a lot of new developments to occur. They seem very protective of the vegetation and the aesthetic of the area. There's been proposed freeway extensions that just have never made it through. I'm not sure if they ever will. I think they like to keep it as a bit of a secret and retain really the natural element. So I don't think we'll have you know
Property developers would have different ideas, I'm
yeah.
sure.
I don't think we're going to have residential towers along the Pean Highway like you see on the Gold Coast or anything like that. I think it'll stay pretty low key like it currently is.
Is that because of a strong community, so politically active? You mentioned that there's a lot of retirees there, so they're fighting to keep the area low density.
Yeah, I think there's an element of that. I think there's a big group and I guess a mindset of the population down here to keep the area sustainable and to be environmentally conscious. So I think all of that sometimes can be prohibitive for development because it sort of eats into that natural environment, the natural feel.
Who do you guys vote for down there collectively? I'm not asking your politics, just asking for the overall LGA.
I think the independents of like everywhere, the Teals have definitely increased their following. I think it's still a Liberal seat federally. There are some. There's a couple of different seats on the peninsula. The seat that I'm in, I think, is held by the Liberals.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Are there any questions I haven't asked? What am I not covering? Have you been going through this thinking, when's he going to talk about this obvious thing?
What have we covered? Crime, population, development, supply, jobs. I think we've pretty much covered most of the statistics that you have on
Yeah.
my
Or what about what it's known for? So what's the reputation? So are there like known celebrities who live in Portsea and they'll come up on Domain as they're selling their house for $20 million and they host a morning show or something?
I don't think it has the same celebrity the same celebrity vibe that say a Byron Bay or maybe a Noosa would have. Certainly there would be. It's not. I mean, everyone knows about Tones and I and Mount Eliza, and there's celebrities down in Portsea for sure. But no, it's not. It's definitely not a. It's not a. It's not a tabloid place to be seen. Playground like some of the Byron Bays would be.
Or Palm Beach. So Palm Beach is known for that more sort of ostentatious. It gets parodied. I don't know if you've seen the show Avalon Now.
No, I
It's a
haven't seen.
Domain show, so it's people from Avalon making fun of themselves as being a little bit pretentious. It's their words, not mine. I'm not saying that they are, but yeah, there is a bit of that reputation. I guess one question, less for the Melbourne audience here, but for people coming from abroad or the rest of Australia, how much of the year can you swim? What's the water temperature like?
You can swim all year round. The bay gets pretty cold in winter. It gets colder than the ocean. This time of year is the best time to swim because it's late summer and the bay's at its warmest. People surf in Flinders and Point Leo even in the winter with full body wetsuits. So it's not like we're in Antarctica. We have certainly colder water than Sydney and New South Wales, but yeah, there's iceberger type groups that swim all year round in the bay. I don't, because I don't like the cold water. It's certainly swimmable from let's call it November to April. I think, well, maybe, yeah, sort of November to April is probably the
Okay.
comfortable
You
swimming.
touched on something. There is something I've forgotten. A community. So,
Yeah.
you mentioned that you've got the icebergs. I'm interested. What community organisations are there, and how would you characterise it?
Yeah, there's some suburbs have got more than others, and probably the suburbs that have more residential permanents have a stronger community. There are sporting clubs like football, netball, soccer. Um, uh, there's community basketball, things like that, tennis. Um, some of the suburbs would have a life-saving club. I know Mount Martha and Mornington do. Um, Sorrento and Portsea both do. I'm sure there's others. There's Back Beach, which is the surf beach, which they have surf life-saving clubs. So there's those sorts of communities. There's yacht clubs. There's the RSLs still, which are in sort of Mornington and Rosebud and um, Rye, I think, has got one as well. So there's certainly clubs for all demographics, whether it's sporting or other. The community feel is fairly strong in Mount Martha, where I live. There's a community house where you can do things like Pilates and yoga. You can book rooms and have functions there. They have cinemas on the lawn, so you can watch movies under the stars. There's those sorts of community events that happen quite often. So I think the northern end of the peninsula probably has a stronger community, although Sorrento, I'd say, also has quite a large residential community as well. And really any of the suburbs that have primary schools tend to have those community type
Mm,
feel activities that are on throughout the year.
sure. What about churches?
Yeah, there's churches. It's just like any other metropolitan suburb in that regard. There's Catholic and Christian schools, particularly at the sort of Mount Martha, Mornington, Mount Eliza um, side of the peninsula. There's not a lot of high schools past Mount Martha. There's Rosebud Secondary and Germana Secondary. Um, so yeah, that's one thing to think about if you are considering moving to the peninsula is the schooling. There's not a lot of private schools past Mount Martha, so some of that commuting, I think you got to take into account if you are going to bring your family down. The school selection is pretty important.
Tell me about the public schools.
Public schools are all have all got really good reputations. They're zoned, and there's multiple schools in suburbs. Mount Martha has two public primary schools. Mornington has two or three. Probably should have this on a list, but there's schools throughout the peninsula. There's no shortage of schools. It's just when you want to go private, yeah, they're more at the top.
Mm, okay. Here's a question. Let's say we're in a convertible. We've got a day, and you want to show me all there is to Mornington Peninsula. I'm your long lost cousin from Germany, and I'm a bit disappointed that there's no Ayers Rock. There's no Sydney Harbour Bridge, and you're like, I want to show this guy that Mornington Peninsula has a lot to offer. What's the route? Where are you going to take me?
Well, I think we would have a coffee first. So we would go to the
Where?
Mornington Industrial Estate. We go to Common
Okay.
Folk. That's my
Yep.
favourite local, and we'd have a coffee. And then we would cruise down to the Pillars in Mount Martha, which is a famous cliff jumping site. So we'd jump in and have a swim there. And then we'd get back into the car and maybe head into Red Hill and visit some wineries. We'd drop into a restaurant for lunch. Maybe if we could get into Tedesca or Point Leo Estate and have something upper class with a view and some fine dining, and then we might head down to Flinders, spend the afternoon playing golf, and then finish up maybe at the Portsea pub for dinner and drinks to watch the sunset.
That sounds really nice. I have to say, despite my sort of critical, analytical data science brain, I am unconsciously being sold on Mornington Peninsula, and I would like you to do exactly that for me when I arrive. We're going to run through that itinerary. I'm going to hold you to it.
Okay, what do you like at golf?
Terrible. I'll watch you play.
It's all right. It's good to play with people that are worse than you. Makes you feel better about your own game.
You will have you'll be like you're on cocaine, how good you're going to feel about yourself against me. Some people miss the holes. I miss the ball. Well, I guess we finish up. Talk about BuyerX.
Yeah, look, BuyerX is it's a national buyers agency, but we are locally based as advocates. So we have offices in Melbourne, Sydney, Perth, Adelaide, the Sunshine Coast, Queensland, and Mornington Peninsula, Victoria. And in those areas, we have local area specialists who specialise in an LGA. So they live in that LGA and they know the suburbs and the agents extremely well. And the reason why we have this model is because we feel that you can't be an expert across a large geographical area. You just don't have the ability to have those relationships or know the streets inside and out. So we specialise. We have agents that work for us that have been in real estate as selling agents, that have been partner level for say 20 years, and have wanted a change of lifestyle. So we offer that to our advocates to come across and have more work-life balance with their role. What that means for you as a client is that you get somebody who knows all of the agents in the area, who has access to all the properties that you can't see, knows the values extremely well, and can really maximise their time spent with you and not in the car driving from one side of the town to the other. So BuyerX is really a service where you can delegate and know that you're getting first-class service.
That is really good. I'd love to thank you very much for joining me today, Michael. Mornington Peninsula, anyone interested, go talk to this guy. You've heard the itinerary that he offers. It's all paid for by him.
That's the first property tour. It involves jumping in to the water off the pillars and
dive right in. That will be awesome for the Instagram video. Once you start going for that first home buyer millennial market, you're going to get the drones up, flying over the cliffs, and it'll be awesome.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Luke. It's been great. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for listening to the Microburbs podcast. If you have any questions for Luke or our guest, please place them in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more great content coming soon.